Starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to tonight's webcast, Spice Up Your Diet with Laura LaValle. Laura is a registered dietitian and nutritionist and hospital-based dietetics, as well as extensive experience in integrative medicine settings, including in clinic. She's extremely knowledgeable in all things dietetics, and I know you'll enjoy her presentation today. There will be a question and answer session at the end, so please raise your hand or use the chat box if you have a question. I'm Libby Bricker, your moderator, and I'm recording tonight's session. We will post the recording on our blog at metaboliccode.com within 24 to 48 hours for your reference. Also on the website, we hope you'll consider registering for a free trial of Lifestyle Guidance Portal using the Join Now button. And I will let Laura take it from here.
I'm not seeing your screen yet, but welcome everyone. Really appreciate you all joining us today. We have a little bit of a, I would say, a lighter-hearted, more fun topic tonight. On one hand, it's lighthearted and fun, but on the other hand, the use of spices, using more spices and herbs in our diet can be absolutely amazing how it can enhance health, prevention, and wellness. So I know that, really and truly, even though I'm a dietitian and, I'm not a chef, but I'm into nutrition and foods and cooking, and I'm really guilty of not using more spices and herbs in my cooking, and I've been trying to improve that over the last couple of years. And so I just thought if we did a little webinar on this, perhaps it would inspire some of you to do more and do better with your use of herbs and spices as well. Really, when you look at the benefits, the health benefits related to a lot of herbs and spices, I kind of didn't see the need to belabor you with a very long reference study list, simply because it can kind of be summarized by saying that most of the benefits that we get from our different spices and herbs are related to the antioxidant potential of them and the polyphenolic compounds that are in the different spices and herbs. So that's kind of how most of them work. If there's a different mechanism, I noted it, but I will give you some of the references and studies and findings on some of the herbs and spices, but I just wanted to make note of that. So you can pretty much know that just about any herb you're going to use, the benefits are from those. One of the points that I really hope we keep in mind as I go through the webinar is what I find in clinical practice as a dietitian is that if we can get our clients to use more spices and herbs in their cooking, there is dramatically improved overall satiety with your meals and your foods. And I think that's huge because I think one of the things that we have trouble getting clients to do often, especially when they're newer to try and improve their diet for their health, is that they tend to go very bland with their cooking. They think their chicken just has to sit there and be really plain. They just saute it up in a pan with salt and pepper, steam some broccoli and have it on the side. And there's nothing more bland and unappealing than that after a while. So it really helps to find ways to get more flavors on our foods. It really, truly does. I'll tell you an example of where I particularly see this is with the use of the HCG diet. I don't know how many of you out there practitioners incorporate HCG diet here and there. We use it some and like it, but it's a very difficult diet to adhere to. Well, one of the things that can really make the difference on that diet of protein, veggies, and in between a little bit of fruit is using spices and herbs and mustards and hot sauces, cayenne peppers, things to spice up and jazz up the flavor in those foods, and it makes such a difference. I think one of the things that can happen is that people aren't sure, what spice to use or what herb to use with what foods, and so I've got a few pointers in here on different foods to pair up with different of the spices, so I hope you get some good ideas. Cinnamon is our hero over the last few years as we've found out how wonderful it is to help blood glucose regulation. I've got a study, and some more information coming up on that, but I thought I'd let you know, a lot of people might not be aware that actually cinnamon is one of the most potent antioxidant capacity spices out there as well. Now, this was a really cool study where they compared cinnamon to antioxidant capacity in other foods. And so they compared it to things like celery and artichoke and spinach and purslane and arugula and red cabbage and chard and even rose hips, and there were a couple other things in there. But compared to all these other wonderful high antioxidant foods, can you believe cinnamon had the best antioxidant effect? And this is the reference, so you guys can look this up if you're interested in this. But my next slide explains how they used, or how they test this. I think this is interesting. When they're looking at antioxidant effect in spices or herbs or foods, one of the things that they look at is how the ingredient affects anticholinesterase activity. For you practitioners, you understand this, but for people that maybe don't, I thought I'd explain a little bit that anticholinesterase is an agent that inhibits the enzyme acetylcholinesterase. That's a substance that breaks down acetylcholine in your nervous system. So, as we know, acetylcholine is a really crucial substance in the nervous system. It's a neuromodulator and a neurotransmitter substance. And one of the key things that it's responsible for is activating our skeletal muscle tissue. So when you want to move a muscle in your body, which we do, of course, all day long, acetylcholine plays a key role in that. Of course, it also plays a role in central nervous system, and it's used in memory and decision-making capacities and much more, but it's really, really key substance in our nervous system. Whenever we have damage to acetylcholine systems, whether it's receptors or acetylcholine itself, one of the effects can be loss of memory, but acetylcholine is the key reason that people with myasthenia gravis lose ability to control and move muscles, is because their body makes antibodies against their acetylcholine receptors, so the acetylcholine never gets to attach to receptors and activate the muscles. So it's interesting because there are, for example, organophosphate pesticides are cholinesterase inhibitors. So when you delay the degradation of acetylcholine, you would have overstimulus, overactivation of things. So these pesticides can be harmful. But one of the things that gets involved with antioxidant capacity is that oxidative damage may be a factor in the breakdown of acetylcholine. So you want to inhibit acetylcholinesterase to limit the breakdown of acetylcholine. You want acetylcholine to be available and there for use by your nervous system. So that's a little bit complicated to follow, but it's just interesting to me that this is one of the key substances that can get damaged by oxidative free radicals. And so one of the key ways they can measure whether a substance is stopping free radical activity is by looking at acetylcholinesterase. So, and we also know that, this free radical damage that can go on in the brain, because the brain is, a highly perfused tissue. We have a lot of blood flow, so we have a lot of oxygen. And our brain tissue is a high fat content tissue, and so it is a tissue that's going to be somewhat more prone to free radical damage. And so anything that has good antioxidant effect is going to be one of the things potentially brain protective, and we know that acetylcholine and all of these mechanisms playing a role in Alzheimer's and other types of dementia. So I just wanted to point out how they test this, because I think this is, really interesting. So when they looked at this study comparing cinnamon to these other foods, it had the best inhibition of acetylcholinesterase, 63% inhibited. The second highest was arugula. They also tested against another synthetic cholinesterase substance called butyrylcholinesterase, and it was 85% inhibited. So it's just kind of used as a control there. But cinnamon had very potent antioxidant capacity there. So looking next to cinnamon, I believe, I've got one of the studies that looked at the use of cinnamon in people with type 2 diabetes. These were people on metformin, and they were given either 120 milligrams or 360 milligrams of cinnamon before breakfast. And it was found that it lowered hemoglobin A1C from 8.9 to 8.2 in the lower dose, and 8.9 to 8.0 in the higher dose, and that was just in 3 months. Of course, to have that dramatic of an impact, you would assume that it has a very good effect on lowering fasting blood glucose, and it did. And it also significantly reduced triglyceride, which you would also expect. But in only 3 months, that's pretty darn good. One of the things I thought I would point out about cinnamon is that it is known to have antimicrobial effects. And as practitioners in integrative health, one of the things that we're always looking to try to keep in balance for people is the balance between beneficial flora and candida growth in the intestines. And so I thought it was interesting that cinnamon oils have been found to be quite effective against the growth of 3 different strains of candida. Now this study I'm citing here, it's the second reference from the Mycopathology journal. They used cinnamon oils, and they were looking at it in use for medical devices because they have a hard time keeping biofilms from growing in medical devices, and cinnamon oil is one of the things that actually will prevent them and clean them up and keep them from growing. But it does also translate to when people eat cinnamon, the oils in the cinnamon have antimicrobial effects, and I just thought it was interesting to know that perhaps one of the benefits could be against the growth of overgrowth of candida. If we just know how to use it here and there in our diet, I think it could be protective. Next slide. So I just, wanted to point out, I think most people know the blood glucose benefits of cinnamon. I think a lot of people might not have known how high it is in antioxidant and that it also has antimicrobial effects. But one of my main goals for tonight is to give you ideas. Cinnamon is traditionally used on toast and, in cereals, muffins, baked goods, things like that. A lot of people now know it's really good sprinkled over sweet potatoes if you have a sweet potato with your lunch or dinner. But other ways, and most people know to sprinkle in coffee and tea is a great way to get some cinnamon in your diet. But you can also use it in protein shakes, things like quinoa salads. It's also very well known for traditional uses in, with fruits, especially baked apples and baked pears. It's absolutely delicious if you sprinkle it over with a little bit of one of your healthier sweeteners like stevia, or maybe just a little bit of agave. Agave is not really considered healthy anymore because it's high fructose, but if you really limit the amount, it tastes great over a baked apple or pear with cinnamon. It's delicious. Same thing, it's very good in fruit salads. But other ways to get it in, which a lot of people don't think about, cinnamon actually pairs really well in things like lentil soups and bean soups, chilies, beef stews, things like that. And it also can be used in, you know, with your spiced nuts and seeds that you can do, where you take a little bit of a sweetener and blend it in with cinnamon and other spices and coat nuts and seeds with it. That's a great way to use it. In terms of for more of the benefits, like for blood glucose lowering, you have to take in more. And the recommended dosages are anywhere from 1/2 teaspoon up to a teaspoon. That's an awful lot of cinnamon every day. It can be somewhat an irritant to stomach linings, and it's not recommended in higher dosages for people with ulcers. But I really don't recommend anybody use, you know, whole like measurements of cinnamon daily and one or 2 teaspoons amount. I just don't recommend it because I feel that, you know, you can overdo anything. I think keeping to about 1/2 teaspoon per day would be enough. If I'm going for treating someone, trying to get them to help lower blood glucose, I'm going to go with a capsuled form of it that cinnamon is used in a blend with other nutrients and things that are needed for blood glucose regulation. I just like that better. Just relying on cinnamon only for blood glucose, I think you have to use too much of it, and it could be irritating to GI line. So that's my recommendation. One thing they do recommend to lower the irritant effect is to use Ceylon cinnamon, because it's lower in a coumarin acidic compound that can be toxic to the liver. So that's one way to help reduce those effects. Okay, so that's cinnamon. Oh, here I decided to give you a nut and seed recipe. Anything recommends butter. You can also insert ghee. It works very well if you want to keep the buttermilk solid in, solids down. But combine cayenne or any other hot pepper and cinnamon, and use an artificial. This recipe that I found was said artificial sweetener equal to about 3 tablespoons of sugar. But of course, we would also recommend experimenting with stevias and monk fruit sweeteners and things like that. But put a little bit of salt in there if you want, or if your nuts are salted, you don't need to put extra salt in. But blend that all up and coat your nuts and seeds with it, and it's delicious. And that's a great way to take in some cinnamon, along with cayenne. I didn't get to do a slide on cayenne. I just ran out of time. But of course, cayenne, one of the benefits of cayenne is that it helps, stimulate basal metabolic rate. So it's got benefits for helping with weight management. So you combine that with something like cinnamon that helps control blood glucose levels. You've got a great winning combo there. Rosemary, one of my favorites. It's been in the news a lot lately because rosemary oil was recently found to improve memory. And I have been noticing that I sniff my rosemary plants a lot more now. I'll pick one of the little sprigs off and kind of rub it between my fingers to release the oils, and it is very enlivening. You'll notice your mind kind of come awake when you do that with rosemary. It's just fantastic. Anyway, because of its very high antioxidant capacity, once again, some of the things being seen in studies, and they're really, really strong studies on rosemary, that there are improvements in blood glucose, cholesterol, and mitigating weight gain. So these are big effects. One of the study I cited here was looking at how does rosemary do this, because it's been seen to do it, And so looking beyond just saying, oh, antioxidant capacity, they wanted to look at mechanisms of action, and they found that it activates AMPK pathways along with PPR pathways. So they're getting down to specifics as to how it does what it does, but it's got tremendous health benefits. And people should be using more rosemary. And it's one of the ones that people, I've found, like when I have clients that come in, they either know about it and love it, or they're like, oh, I'm not sure where to use it. So give you a little more info on that. So my next slide is my uses and ways to use it. You know, there's one of my little rosemary plants from the house, but it's traditionally used with more like chicken, but any meat and potatoes. I don't know if you've ever done just fresh rosemary where you just kind of chop it up and you toss it in with some cubed or, you know, potatoes cut up like French fries, but with your oil and other seasonings, you know, sea salt, pepper. It really blends deliciously with meats and potatoes. So that's kind of the traditional way to use it. It's especially good with chicken. You'll see recipes where they take a ton of fresh rosemary and just pile it all over your chicken and with your other seasonings, and let that oil infuse into the chicken as you bake it in the oven. It's just delicious. But another way to get more rosemary is to infuse it into oils, and a lot of people aren't quite sure how to do that. So I thought I'd give you a little lesson in infusing in oils. And of course, you can look anything up on the internet. But when you want to infuse rosemary into an oil, you do need to have an oil that will tolerate a little bit of heat, because you can just put the rosemary sprigs in there and just let it sit in there, and over time it will, the rosmarinic oils and acids will come out of the herb and go into the oil, but that takes a while. If you want to speed the process, you can put the rosemary into a pan with the oil and warm it just a little bit, and that will speed up the process. So then you can use those oils in your cooking, you know, and salad dressings. So that's a great way to get more rosemary intake. I don't know if any of you have ever tried those Marcona almonds that are toasted with rosemary from Trader Joe's, but they're really delicious, and they have a wonderful, you know, just taste and aroma of rosemary. Another thing that you can do with rosemary is just put it in hot water on the stove and heat up and steep for a few minutes, and then you can take that water and add it to teas, and it could even be used, you know, like for iced teas. Now, thyme is another herb that's got tremendous antioxidant capacity. It's in kind of the rosemary family, I believe. And I don't have specific slides on it, but I wanted to make sure to mention that everything that you do with rosemary are also things that you can do with thyme. Thyme you'll often see used in things like cream cheese spreads. So you can experiment. I use, you know, Daya non-dairy versions of cream cheese, and they're much better if you spice them up and add in some chopped fresh herbs and onions and garlics and, you know, peppers and things like that. So I just sort of put a little note down there about using thyme in a lot of the same ways as you do rosemary. Now, this was my, this is a star of my show tonight, guys. I want people to know this. You know, in today's day and age, one of the ways we find that one of the health measures that are so important is that the vast majority of people do much better on lower carb diets. You know, I've had multiple webinars going over all the ins and outs of this. In order for people to have more satiety, they need to take in more protein. And the only concern we have with that is that you want to make sure people aren't overcooking their meats and animal proteins. it really does increase risks. So I've mentioned in some of my past webinars ways to lower your intake of cancer-promoting substances that form when we cook meats, and that's the heterocyclic amines. Well, lo and behold, one of the ways to reduce the formation of heterocyclic amines in cooked animal proteins is to use high antioxidant, high polyphenol spices. What you do is you put the spices into marinades. So, I mean, you can rub them on the meat as well, but one of the best ways to get those compounds in the herbs to come out of the leaves and the plant is to put them in with oil and vinegar and make a marinade and soak your meat in that. When you do that, it lowered the formation of heterocyclic amines dramatically. Caribbean spices were highest, and that's probably because of the jerk and Jamaican allspice. They tend to have some clove, and clove is really high antioxidant. General other herbs reduced it by 72%, and Southwest seasonings like chili powders and what am I thinking? What's the other one that starts with a C? That I use all the time when I make chili. But they lowered it not nearly as dramatically, but significantly.
Cumin?
So,
Cumin?
What's that? Cumin, yeah, thanks. But adding high polyphenol spices like rosemary and oregano to meats before cooking, in my first study there, reduces formation and absorption of malondialdehyde by 71%. Malondialdehyde is a lipid peroxidation byproduct. It's very damaging to DNA. And so not only can we lower heterocyclic amine production, we know we can prevent lipid peroxidation. Basically what happens, you know, when the fatty component of the meat gets heated, it can form this aldehyde substance that's damaging to us. So, you know, it's a win-win all around, and I really am personally starting to try to emphasize this more when I do diet instruction with people, is to really be careful how you cook your meats and your animal proteins, and do things to lower those heterocyclic amine production, and spices are just one of the best ways I can think of to do it, because you know, not only do you improve how healthy the food is for you, you improve the taste. So it's a huge win-win, and it's something everyone should be doing. Another thing that spices do is they inhibit the formation of advanced glycation end products in proteins. So this was a study that looked at, you know, just real commonly used spices, and said, and found that it reduced the formation of glycation glycoproteins in cell lines in vitro. And so while it hasn't yet been carried all the way out through to what they're going to find in humans, it's looking very promising. And this would make sense, because if we know that we have good antioxidant capacity in a lot of these spices, it would make sense that you would, and you're improving blood glucose, that you would start to improve formation of glycation end products. So in this particular study, the most potent spices to reduce this effect were cloves, Jamaican allspice, and cinnamon. Oregano, sage, and black pepper were all more effective than they thought they would be. Ginger and bay leaf weren't quite as effective, but they also looked at thyme, onion, garlic, parsley, and found that in general there were good effects from these spices. Now, one of the questions that always comes up with herbs and spices is, especially herbs, is do they need to always be fresh? One of the things that is maddening, I find, with herbs is, you know, when I buy fresh, especially basil, it goes bad so quickly. You know, they can go bad pretty quickly. So unless you grow your own, which I've been growing rosemary, sage, thyme, and basil, you know, it's not always convenient to have fresh. So you'll be heartened to know, as I was, that even the dried forms have pretty significant antioxidant capacity. So that was good news to me. This was a study that looked at, okay, when we have dried forms of herbs or we have paste forms, you've seen paste forms of things like basil and garlic especially, they have those tubes of them at the grocery store. So what they did was they looked at different forms and measured antioxidant capacity. And what they found was that, yes, compared with fresh, our dry forms of garlic, chili, dill, oregano, and parsley, and also the paste forms of oregano and basil, had reduced antioxidant capacity, so it's not as high as the fresh, but they all still had significant antioxidant capacity. And interesting that oregano has the highest antioxidant capacity in this study. So don't worry, your processed herbs are great, and they're still we still get a lot of benefit out of them. They still retain their antioxidant capacity amazingly, so that was good news. Just getting you a few more ideas here. You know, ginger is another great herb that's you've been seeing more studies pop up on it lately. Very strong antioxidant capacity, and you know, things like, you know, very strongly cancer protective and preventive that are popping up in journals. So you know, just wanted to mention ginger as another great herb to keep in mind to try to increase our intake of. You know, we know it as, you know, it's used we get it when we go eat sushi. But you can do things like use some fresh ginger in your smoothies or your ginger powders. You can use them in yogurts. You can use them in salad dressings and again in marinades. And of course teas. Ginger is traditionally used to soothe stomach, you know, upset stomach, nausea, used for motion sickness. In fact, I used ginger tablets one time on a cruise, and they helped a lot. But again, it's more than just for that. There's other great benefits, and so one of my favorite ways that I use ginger is, you know, kind of a more traditional way in salad dressings, but it's delicious. So on my next slide, I think I have a recipe for using ginger in dressing. I think, you know, you make up a batch of this, and it'll last for, you know, a few uses, but it's delicious. So this recipe, three cloves garlic minced with fresh ginger, olive oil. The traditional recipe calls for Asian ginger dressing, calls for soy sauce, but if you want to make sure it's gluten-free, you can use tamari, or if you need gluten and soy-free, you can use coconut aminos. Should have capitalized those. A little bit of some kind of sweetener, and water and some rice vinegar. Put that all up in a container and shake it all up, and you're good to go. Stick it in your refrigerator and you'll have it for a few times. It's a really great fresh salad dressing. Now, I don't always have rice vinegar on hand. I very often will substitute apple cider vinegar in for this, and it works just fine. I've also had some version of this dressing that I've made before where we used a little bit of a tomato sauce in it, so it makes it a different color and taste that's really, really, really tasty. And I've seen other varieties where you can put in some fresh squeezed orange juice. They're all different versions, but it's delicious, and it's a great way to get in more ginger. Turmeric, of course, everybody knows turmeric for its anti-inflammatory properties, very high in phenolic compounds, lots of research coming through on turmeric as potential to avert, and help in our fight against chronic diseases that are plaguing us so much, heart disease, cancer, arthritis, Alzheimer's. I thought it was interesting as I was just kind of glancing over some of the research. There's a study that shows that it actually may inhibit the expression of this protein, bisfatin, which is something that's believed to lead to the development and progression in breast cancer. So that was amazing. So everybody kind of knows turmeric as one of those wonderful spices that has got great anti-inflammatory properties. But I find that it seems like people either like, turmeric or they don't. Curried foods, a lot of people don't like curry. So if you don't like curry, is there some way we can get this in? So I just tried to get a few more ideas for us here. Go to my next slide. It's great on chicken and fish, and again, that's if you like it. It's used in, Moroccan dishes, couscous, tagine, things like that. But another place you can use turmeric actually is in soups. It's really good. Even I'm not a huge curry fan. I like it when somebody who really knows how to make those traditional Indian and Moroccan dishes. I can eat it. But it's really, really good in soups, like carrot soups and squash soups especially, but really any kind of, you can just add it to some sort of chicken vegetable soup. It's also blends in, I have found, really nicely in different types of protein shakes and smoothies, so think of it there. And this was something I haven't tried yet, but I found this recipe online. I want to try this, because we almost always have some kind of almond milk or cashew milk on hand, but use turmeric, and you would want to experiment with different amounts. That's why I didn't put an amount on there. With ginger, what I just talked about, so fresh grated ginger, and just put that in with your milk and blend it up. Another place you can use turmeric that you wouldn't traditionally think about is in egg salad, chicken salad, tuna salads, things like that. It blends really nicely in those foods. So just trying to get some ideas for how the people can get it in that aren't, great curried food type lovers. That's another one of those types of foods that seems like people either love it or hate it. So hopefully those ideas help you out. This was just kind of a short and sweet seminar tonight. My main goal of it was just to, really inspire you to try to do more by for your health, by using more spices with your foods and your cooking. One of my favorite spices, sage, and I didn't include a slide, but it's another one. It's in that rosemary family. And, it's being purported to be, possibly protective and helpful in blood pressure, diabetes, anti-inflammatory. It's another one with antimicrobial and high antioxidant capacity. And it's delicious. It's traditionally used with pork, but you can make sage teas. You can put sage in butter or ghee and use that on potatoes. It's delicious in mashed potatoes. But look up recipes. I found a recipe called sage broccoli squash risotto. So I just hope it inspired you to try to step outside of your comfort zone and do more to include some of these wonderful health-promoting spices more regularly in your daily intake of foods. We don't have to wait on a special occasion, and we shouldn't. So hopefully you're inspired to do more with spices in your life, and especially to inform your clients on how to use spice marinades on proteins to reduce cancer risk from the heterocyclic amines. So anyway, thank you so much for tuning in this evening. It's an early evening for our East Coast and an afternoon for our West Coast. But thanks for whenever you listen, and I hope you were inspired and got some good pointers. We try to incorporate use of these healthy spices in our recipes on our Metabolic Code diet materials, although we did try to keep our recipes simple by the same token. So just know that even though we have some base recipes, feel free to spice them up however you're inclined to do with more of these healthy spices. And you know, you're welcome to check out our lifestyle guidance portal. Our Metabolic Code diet materials are included with the account on that. And if you're not already using Metabolic Code, we encourage you to check us out. And I will be doing another webinar, although I'm not sure what I want my topic to be next time. So stay tuned. We will announce it. And again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Laura. I want to keep an eye on the questions. If there are any questions that might come through here to wrap us up. Right now, I'm not seeing any hands raised. I don't want to close out the session just in case people are typing. So you can also type in any topic suggestions if you don't have questions. And it looks like maybe we do have at least, thought there was one that came through. Oh, here it is. There's a hand that is raised.
Oh, okay.
I find it. Okay, Joel, I am going to unmute you so you can ask your question. So you are self-muted, so when you can unmute, we're ready for your question when you are.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just have a question because I've been reading recently that you know, meat and is carcinogenic in terms of the heterocyclic amines that they're produced when we cook them. So my question is, why would I use a spice on something that it can cause cancer if you eat a lot of that instead of avoiding it altogether? Because we're kind of hiding or trying to hide the problem with the spices as opposed to not eating.
Well, people, here's the situation. I've been a dietitian for 25 years. And what I am finding is that I have a harder and harder time controlling blood glucose and controlling weight and in people on high carb diets. When you take protein out, what you're left with are high carb foods. You're left with, you know, rices and grains and vegetables and fruit, and those are all okay, but they jack up blood sugar. And many people have a hard time controlling their weight and their blood glucose on those types of diets. And one of the problems I find is appetite control. So it's what the finding is that by including animal protein, it's one of the it helps us with bone density as we age, and it helps with appetite control. It's one of the big benefits. In fact, in anti-inflammatory diet studies, one of the big things they do is make sure that people include animal protein with meals to control glycemic effects of meals. So combining protein with your other foods helps keep your glycemic response down. So there are very important reasons that people might need some animal protein in the diet, and that's what I find. Having some animal protein in there helps control hunger, and helps people control their weight and helps keep glycemic response down. So that's the reason. But what Americans in particular are really bad about is wanting to throw everything on the grill and do high heat cooking. And what they find is low heat cooking on your animal proteins will save most of the heterocyclic amine production, will be controlled just by that alone. So inform people, if you're going to use animal proteins, cook at low heats. And another way to be extra protective is to use marinades. So those are the reasonings that I have found, is to control the glycemic effect of people, what people are eating.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it looks like we do have another question. What kind of protein would you recommend for a patient on a vegetarian or even
I only caught part of the question. LaValle, on a vegetarian or what?
do you have protein recommendations for those following vegetarian or vegan diets?
Not really. It's just really hard. There's, you can't do too much soy. It's just too, I see this in men, vegetarians and vegans that have eaten a lot of soy. They find estrogenic effects from soy. And soy is highly allergenic. So what I find in people who have been doing vegan or vegetarian diets for a long time, they'll often end up immune reactive on soy because it's just so allergenic. The other thing is soy, you've got to really watch. I really recommend not doing anything but organic soy, as non-organic forms are definitely GMO, and that's can be hard to find, is organic soy. But soy is one of your best protein sources, and you just can't, on a vegetarian diet, and you just can't overdo it. I reviewed a study in one of my webinars where I reviewed vegetarian, vegan, and ketogenic diets. I chose those two because they're such opposites, contrasting diets. And there's a study that they did called an eco vegetarian or vegan diet. And what they did was they studied vegan diets to try to make them lower glycemic, because it is a known issue of vegetarian diets that in countries and populations where there are more vegetarian and vegan eaters, rates of diabetes are really high. And so one of the cautions of vegan and vegetarian diets is to try to make them as low glycemic as possible. And in that eco-vegan diet study, they used soy and seitan, which is baked wheat gluten, as a protein source. And it was a super high dropout rate, and with as many people that don't tolerate gluten nowadays, there are so many people for whom baked wheat gluten would not be an option. It's just really hard. So what I recommend people do is, use some soy, but don't overdo it. Rotate it in. I really don't recommend seitan at all. I just don't think that would be good for the vast majority of people. Most people I'm trying to get that are doing vegetarian, I'm trying to get gluten out. And then use some other things like beans. Beans are decent protein. Again, beans and legumes, they're wonderful, but they are high lectin foods. We want to use them for resistant starch, but after a while, what's ideal is to not eat beans and legumes every single day, but to rotate them in. And of course, you can use some nut butters, but none of them are great sources. I really prefer, if people want to be, vegetarian, most of the time, that they try to do the flexitarian approach, where they will occasionally eat a little bit of animal protein, either in an egg or a little bit of fish. I really find people do better, personally. But that's, you know, those are your options.
Thank you. Well, it looks like that is going to wrap it up for questions. So thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I will process the recording and post this within 24 to 48 hours on metaboliccode.com on our blog, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.
Oh, Libby, real quick, I should mention, we try to do our best also on vegetarian and vegan diets using rice, pea, and hemp protein powders. Those are helpful.
Okay, good.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you. Have a great day.